Today's agenda includes an introduction, a talk about what and why we document, and we'll spend most of our time talking about how we document the impact, and we'll add some time for some peer-to-peer exchange, and then at the end we'll have a quick poll and some announcements. To get us started, here are some housekeeping tips. This session is being recorded and will be available later on our website for viewing. All participants will be muted until the check-in and peer exchange in the checkout sections. If you encounter technical issues, please either use the chat box to send us a message or email Carla, our project manager, at the email listed on the slide. At this time, we'll unmute the participants, and we'd like for you to please introduce yourself by sharing your name, what community you're from, what role, and what is it for today. I'll start. My name is Edna. I am in the Cook County area, but we also support communities across the state. My role in the community is as a community systems support person, and a question that I'd like to explore today is really just the same question, wanting to know what it is that you, the participants, are interested in learning more about. So if I can invite you to please introduce yourself, I'd appreciate it. And there's only about about 8 people on. So no worries about talking over each other. There's only a few people on, and everybody will have a chance to introduce themselves. And you've been unmuted.
This is Penny with the Illinois State Board of Education. I'm joining because I would like to learn more about what's happening in communities regarding community systems development and learn more about how I can support these efforts going forward as the funder and concerned person.
Thank you, Penny.
This is Jackie, and I'm from Child Care Resource Service, and I think it's like Penny. I'm here to listen to information and to see what I can do, our organization can do to help enhance community systems development.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you. Someone else?
This is Elaine Dunsing. I'm with Prevent Child Abuse Illinois, and I work with home visiting programs, and so I'm just interested, pretty similar to Penny and Jackie, about how I can help support home visiting programs as they do collaborative work.
Thank you, thank you, Elaine. Someone else?
This is Keela Guyton. I am at DuPage Federation on Human Services Reform, and I support local collaboration throughout DuPage County, and I am looking for new ways to explore community systems development and supporting our local collaborations.
Thank you so much, and welcome to the CSD world.
Thank you.
Someone else? And just a reminder, it's just a quick introduction, your name, what community you're from, what role you play in your community, and what's a question you might like to explore today. There's probably about another 3 people who are still left to introduce yourselves. If you're having a technical issue, just make sure that you type in your box because maybe you're still muted. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue on. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to mute you at this time. If you have an issue, feel free to raise your hand or enter it in the chat box as we move along. Thanks to all of you for helping us get started. At this time, we'd like to start a discussion on the what and the why of documenting the impact. And so what is it, so when you hear or see the phrase documenting impact, oftentimes we think about, well, what does that mean? Well, we'd like to share a simple description of what we think it means. To us, it might mean that it is a process used to record the community's efforts by gathering the measurements of strategies that have been implemented and the degree to which the goals have been reached over time. And just to take a pulse, if folks would like to add something else to what they think that documenting impact means, feel free to enter it in the chat box, and I could read them off as they come in. Okay, we'll move on. Now we'll shift to the why it's important to document the impact. By tracking impact both over time and during specific time periods, collaborations are able to improve or expand on their strategies, and they're able to help other partners adapt similar strategies to meet the community's needs. Without documenting the community's efforts, collaborations may not be able to assess whether its strategies are successful. Another reason why it's important to document is that it helps to provide evidence to community partners, to elected officials, and to potential funding sources. Now we're going to move along to the how. During the collaboration sort of traditional process of documenting their community systems work, folks like to focus on the vision, the mission, objectives, and strategies. Here we define the vision as what the group's dreams for how things should be in their community. When we refer to our mission, it defines the what it is and why it needs to be done. As we move along to the objectives, they define how much of what will be accomplished and by when. It is a good idea to start with a baseline, to identify what markers could be assessed and how the collaborations hope that they could change this. Make sure that your objectives are also SMART. When we say SMART, we mean specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. Another part of the traditional process is that communities will develop strategies and monitor this through an action plan. When we talk about strategies, we talk about defining how things will be accomplished, what those activities might be, what those relationships might be built, and how it will be accomplished over time. The action plan identifies the community's changes that will be achievable through the goals and the objectives. You also have to think about what levels may be targeted. Are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about families, organizations, or the broader system? It is a good idea to include those who will be affected by the strategies to help design the strategies, and also to include those that will contribute to the strategies. When we talk about an action plan and identifying the changes, we want to make sure to use this tool to help the collaboration stay on track and to capture the data. It is important to implement the action plan by identifying who will take on the strategies, where the strategies will take place, and over what amount of time. Is it monthly, is it quarterly, or annually? The final part of the action plan is to please build in some time to check and review the action plan regularly and make adjustments as necessary. At this time, we're going to unmute you, and we'd like to just take a pause and think about if there's anything missing from the slides, the information that we just shared. We talked about groups identifying a vision, a mission, objectives, strategies, and using an action plan. Based on your experience, is there anything else that may be missing? And you have all been unmuted, so feel free to share your thoughts.
Hi, this is Jackie. I think part of what's missing, and it's not really missing because it happens through the process, but is the real initial relationship building, because community systems development is actually contingent upon the type and the depth of relationship that the organizations have with each other and their willingness to partner for systems change.
This is Elaine, and just kind of to piggyback off that, I really feel like that you have to look at the community buy-in. So you have to have all those folks that you want to have at the table. They're going to all have to agree that this is something that needs to be done.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move along. Thank you so much for sharing. Some items, as you mentioned, such as the relationship building and the buy-in, are very important, as you noted. The other items, when we talk about documenting the impact, are creating a logic model. And when we talk about a logic model, we describe it as a visual representation of what is being accomplished and how it is being accomplished. It shares the connections between the activities and the changes that take place over time. It is suggested to use a forward and a backward logic to check the flow. What we mean by a forward logic check is to possibly use if-then statements. Choose the steps to produce and the identified effects. When we refer to a backward, we think about starting at the outcome part of it and moving backwards to the activities, the resources, and the partners to be able to complete those goals. A logic model can also be adjusted over time. Here is an example of one community's framework, which includes indicators, their vision, mission, goal, objectives, and strategies. If you look at their vision, it says that their vision is to engage the whole community in preparing children to succeed in school and life. They've listed indicators and their goals, but they've also aligned it to the state goal, stating that by 2021, 80% of all children and 65% of children with high needs will demonstrate full readiness by kindergarten entry. If you note, you'll see that the puzzle pieces at the top, the blue ones, are the goals that they have identified. And the boxes, sort of the word clouds, if you will, or the text boxes underneath those puzzle pieces are their objectives. And they have also listed on the bottom when those activities will be taking place, when those objectives will take place over the span of the child's developmental stages. Another item that we need to mention are identifying the outcomes. We want to make sure that we list what it is that we want to accomplish. Are they short-term, which is to increase a knowledge or skill? Is it intermediate, which is a change in the community program or policy or practice? Or is it long-term? Is it a behavior change at the population level? When we talk about the outcomes and the logic models, we want to make sure that we are creating methods to collect the data. We'd like to explore opportunities to either conduct surveys with families, with providers, to conduct interviews, to identify what those community level indicators are, and possibly explore some case studies. Some questions to consider as you launch into this work that will help you identify data points to collect is, how do we measure these efforts? What currently exists? What data currently exists? Is there accessible data to help create a baseline? Will there be community buy-in, such as what you mentioned before? And do we have to develop a data sharing agreement? Some additional items that may have been missing from the first section are identifying what the indicators are. We need to identify what you need to do in order to get the outcomes, things that you can influence or impact. As we're digesting all of this information, some questions that can help you identify the indicators are making sure that you identify what the desired outcome is, that you discuss how you are going to measure the progress, and another question is, how will you know what you've achieved your outcome? And finally, how often will you review progress towards the outcome? Lastly, another item that we want to include is to think about the criteria that is used to measure the success. We want to look at the outputs, what people do, and who are you reaching out to. We may want to think about the participation rates. We may want to track the changes in behavior among staff. We may want to think about the policies that are emerging among programs in the community. And again, looking at the improvements at the community level indicators. At this time, we will unmute you and take a pause to try to digest all of the information you have just heard. So as we reviewed these past couple of slides, and we talked about logic models, we talked about outcomes, we talked about methods to collect the information, we talked about indicators and criteria, I'd like to find out who among you have used type process. Possibly share what's worked for you, how did it inform your efforts, and if there's any additional ideas that you'd like to suggest for your peers that are on the phone today. You have all been unmuted now. If you are having technical issues, also feel free to send your comments through the chat box. We believe a couple of folks may be having some issues and are listening, but maybe not able to hear your voice. So feel free to use the chat box.
Edna, this is Keela Guyton. So I find this helpful. I can't necessarily speak in regards to like the exchange and how we've used the process. I know that this has occurred in DuPage County with some of our local collaborations, but trying to drill down a little bit further with our data collection and trying to build a data schedule, I think that this kind of these bullet points that you provided here gives me a way to go about it as we approach each of the individual collaborations to say, how are we going to do this? What are our indicators and what are we going to look for in moving forward so that it's all kind of centralized in a way, because we're the regional collaboration, and so each one of them have different data points and different times that they need information and how they want to report their outcomes. And so I like this, and definitely I appreciate the questions and the additional items to consider. So I just wanted to add that in. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's good to hear that you have an experience with several collaborations, and so it is helpful to think about these questions and possibly explore the use of a data schedule to again be able to provide that information to them as needed, and knowing that they have different things that they're measuring, but really helping to frame sort of what is needed and then when it's needed by. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone like to add?
This is Jackie. I've also had a wonderful experience of working with some collaborations that have used this process, and I know that it's helped them refine their goals, their objectives, the way they measure some of the activities that are going on. And I also see it as not only something that individuals do for community systems development, with all different aspects of the community, but it also has been something that people do if they just have one particular issue that they're working with and they're trying to move across agencies to deal with the issue, and I see this process working in that type of endeavor also.
Thank you, Jackie. It's helpful to hear how you sort of look at it broadly, but really that you're able to replicate that process when you're trying to narrow it down to even a specific issue. And so that also is very, I think it's a very helpful strategy to use and in order to help to refine what the activities are, what the goals might be. So thank you so much for sharing, Jackie. Anyone else like to share? Okay, we're going to move along to the next section of our webinar. So over the past 2 years, several communities throughout the state have engaged in a systems change process / training, such as the Able Change framework to inform, to modify, and to strengthen their strategic plans and community work. So we're going to call this sort of our enhancement section, because we know that a lot of collaborations are doing great work and they might have strategic plans. And sometimes what we hear is, we put a lot of effort into creating strategic plans, but then sometimes they just, they may just sit in on somebody's shelf and someone's computer, and we may not revisit it until, the next time that the strategic plan is due. And so we'd like to share some enhancements of how we actually use that, how we're able to use these processes to really make that strategic plan alive and useful and really helping to guide the work in an action sort of learning cycle. And so what we'd like to share is that we know that folks are familiar with the basic components of a strategic plan, such as the vision, the goals, the objectives, and strategies. And here we're going to share some terms that communities have sort of adopted as they've engaged in this process. As you can see on the second bullet point, on the left-hand side is sort of where the collaborations have usually used the terms around their strategic plan. So it might be in the impact and the vision, the goal and the strategy. And if you look on the section to the right, when we talk about sort of the systems change process, folks have identified what their targeted problem is. And so, yes, we want to know, we envision our community acting in a certain way and having these certain things, but we really need to get to the root of why these things aren't happening. And so communities have gone through a process of of identifying what their targeted issues are, and that has been the one to sort of set their work moving forward. And again, I'd just like to share this as a way that you can kind of compare what their strategic plan terms usually are with some terms that you may start to hear among your peers as they're doing this work as well. The next item is around the goal. And so when we talk about identifying what those targeted problems are, we really start to think about what are the issues that are coming up. And so as these issues come up, we start to label them as our mega headlines or our goals. And once we identify sort of these goals, we really start to dig down deeper and understand why this is happening. And so as we emerge, as the reasons emerge as to why these things are happening, we then sort of use those as our objective. That would be sort of the translation of an objective. And then lastly, the strategy is just a strategy. That there's sort of no other way around it, but it really is just identifying what it is and where and with who it is that you are going to start to attempt to chip away at some of these big goals. As we talk about the process, folks have identified a couple of main points of the process. And again, it really is engaging sort of a lot of perspectives as far as who these issues are happening with, and then who might be contributing to, or who might be trying to support these issues that these families are facing. And so it's really important to make sure that you engage them and that you help them identify what changes and resources might be used to identify the issue and to understand the underlying reasons. And a process that we talk about as far as identifying the target issues, you may want to leverage existing meetings or existing opportunities, possibly in waiting rooms, possibly at health clinics and WIC offices, at parent meetings, at different community events that may be happening in health fairs, and to just really leverage those opportunities to help folks think about what might be the issue in your community that children from birth to 5 may be facing. The next big part of this process is engaging in a system scan. And again, this really starts to dig deeper as far as understanding why the targeted issue is happening. And so as you're leveraging these points, these opportunities throughout the community, you really need to understand, besides what the issue is understanding why that this is happening. As you continue to collect this information, that information, the sort of the why and the root causes, are going to really help you identify what those strategies are going to be to make sure that you're connecting why the community thinks that this is happening to what you're going to be using in order to sort of chip away at those root causes. Sometimes communities may identify the issue and may identify the why, but they stop it there and don't continue to dig deeper. And so what the enhancement is really starting to sort of do the 5 whys and really dig into where this is happening, why this is happening, who is it happening with, among who is it happening, and really to get into sort of, again, those 5 whys as to why these, how you can define the strategy to make sure that the work that you're doing is really aligned to what the issue is. And lastly, it's important that as you start to chip away, it might be that you've built a new partnership with a community member. It might be that the health partner decided, hey, you can use our wait room to collect some information from families. It might be that you have been invited by your elected official to come to a meeting that that several community members will be at as a way to help introduce sort of your efforts. And so all of these things really start to chip away at what the bigger issue is, And again, focusing on what you guys have shared is that it's really based on relationships and really getting that community buy-in. And so it's important that you track all of these small wins, especially as you know that you're chipping away at a bigger issue. It is hard to think about where you're starting at and where you need to go. And so it is important. You can use a Google Sheet. You can use a Word document. It might be helpful, for some of those community partners that are really interested in data to help you track all of these small wins and to be able to share them as a celebration of where you started at, and maybe, on a monthly or a biannual time span, you share those opportunities. And so the next part of this is where, as we were talking about the small wins and collecting that information, you want to also make sure that you're using your action plan, or what folks know also as your work plan. You want to be sure that because in your work plan you have your strategies, your objectives, your goals, and your vision, you want to make sure that you're adding the actions or the strategies to your meeting agendas, as a way of making sure that you're not meeting just to meet, but that you're meeting to actually solve problems. And you're able to sort of keep track of who's doing what within your collaborations work. It's also a great opportunity to collect the feedback, to look at the action plan and to collect feedback to see how things are going in between meetings. And also to make sure that the actions are actually making a difference. How do they tie them into the outcomes? And lastly, it's important that you look at what is working, where is it working at, and is this an opportunity to replicate this strategy with additional settings across the system, and making sure that the strategy is easy to use. Again, I know that I've shared a lot of information with you at this time. I'd like to just take a pause, and I'd like us to reflect on the information that we shared as far as the enhancements that we might be able to include as we support collaborations in this work, or as we also take on this work ourselves. We talked about the process of overlapping sort of what we're used to within the strategic plan terminology, if you will, with sort of a systems change framework. We've talked about identifying a targeted issue. We've talked about engaging different folks to share what the experiences they've had and where possible changes might be able to happen as they're designing strategies. We've also talked about opportunities to track and collect and track the information. We've talked about being sure to share your small wins, really thinking about what new relationships have been made, what tiny opportunities somebody else has shared with you that you've been able to accomplish that is really chipping away at that bigger goal. We've talked about also making sure that we use our action plan or our work plan also as a living document to really try to build in what actions people are taking into our meeting agendas, and making sure who's doing that, where is it happening, what we're learning from it, really using our work plan / action plan as a way to continue to move the work forward. And so at this time, we're going to unmute you, We're going to unmute you, and we're going to ask about what your experience might be in using these couple of items. What's worked for you? How did it inform your efforts? And are there any other ideas or barriers that you have experienced?
This is Elaine, and one of the things that I think that you pointed out that was most probably helpful was the idea that you always put your action plan or your strategic plan items on your agenda for your meetings. That really does help your group focus and you don't flounder, and that's a really good tip.
Thanks, Elaine. Anyone else?
This is Jackie, and I know several collaborations have used surveys and focus groups to help collect information about issues and the wheres, the whys, things like that, and that it has also helped the groups figure out what, like whether there needs to be action, like task groups, and they need to split because there's several issues going on and they need to focus on the different issues at the same time, so they divide into little different groups. Or it's also helped to decide whether that's actually needed and whether an issue can be identified, and then the group can proceed to deal with it as a whole group.
Thanks, Jackie, and especially for thinking about, what communities have been using. They've been using the surveys and the focus groups, and really, sometimes you get communities have shared that, they get so much information and there's so many issues that have bubbled up, and really, that tension of like, okay, so what are we dealing with first? Who has, kind of going where the energy is, and really thinking about, how and who is able to sort of address and take some action steps on these various issues. So that's really helpful to think about, how to use these as folks are identifying the issues and identifying who they might actually be able to partner up with, using it sort of as an engagement strategy. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Fania Mojica. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Hi, Fania. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties earlier. I really like the point that you touched on about celebrating or pointing out and documenting the small wins. I think that that's often an aspect that is very overlooked because we get so kind of tunneled into what our long-term goals are and what we're ultimately trying to achieve that we overlook some of the small wins that we have achieved. And when we're talking about like replication later down the line, if we miss those things in our data, we kind of miss out on what were the stepping stones to achieving our long-term win? What do we need to do or redo to recreate this situation again in other situations? So I really like that you touched on that.
Yes, I think, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I really hear, a lot of communities share, that they get so into the work, and getting down into the weeds and the day-to-day work, and that, sometimes folks may not really think about, how important those small wins are. And so I really like the way that you framed it as, what are the steps that we took to sort of get to the bigger strategy, right? And if you had to explain it to people, and let's say sometimes there's a change in leadership, sometimes there's changes in partners, and if you're able to really document those small wins, that really tells your story of how you did what you did and who and where it happened. And so I really appreciate you sort of framing it that way. Thanks, Fania. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Jackie again, and I think I'm, sort of saying this to the choir, but I think the wonderful thing about surveys and focus groups and talking to clients wherever they're at is because we can see only a little bit of the issue from where we stand, but when we reach out to individuals who are in the midst of experiencing what's going on, then we get to see something that we probably wouldn't be able to see, and we get to understand it from a different perspective.
It is, and I've heard several communities say, in order for us to really get at nitty-gritty, root causes and issues, they've used this term of, they need to get out of the building, right? And you need to be able to leverage those opportunities to get that input from folks. And so I think, you're really spot on when you talk about, as as community members, you may only be able to see so much from your, from your point, but then once you're getting out into the community and leveraging those relationships, it really paints a bigger picture, right? And so I think it's important. It's an important note to make in regards to you kind of only get what you get if, depending on where you're getting your information from. Anyone else like to share another thought? Okay, so this is bringing us closer towards the end of our webinar, and I really appreciate everybody sharing your thoughts and giving your examples of what you guys have been experiencing in the communities. I'd like to just open it up for general questions, if you will. Again, you can feel free to enter them in the chat box, but you're also going to be unmuted as you talk about, possibly, as you've been doing this work in the community, what might be some of those barriers that you've encountered, and maybe that this is a space that folks can possibly help you problem solve. And so if anybody wants to share maybe something that they've done within all of these processes that you really want to focus on, something that may have stopped because of some issue that happened, and again, maybe somebody else might be able to share how they overcame that same barrier. So again, you've been unmuted, and if anybody would like to share or ask any other questions, now's the time to do so.
I have a question, and this came up in one of the groups that I was in, and we were talking about perhaps trying to develop something so that each group didn't have to do a screening, and people could get a release of, information, or, a release of, and share that they were doing it. They had already done it with one group, and so they didn't need to do it with another. But what comes up is that's, if it didn't, I think sometimes an action involves more than what one level is able to do, and you have to get higher levels involved, and that sort of thing has to come from somebody much higher up than you. And my question is how do you get that? How do you get that approval?
So let me try to understand what your question is. Is that, so in your experience, folks have possibly used a developmental screening as an opportunity to really collaborate on some work, and so instead of folks sort of having children have multiple developmental screenings, is there an opportunity to kind of have sort of a shared, like if somebody's providing that developmental screening, is there an opportunity to share results or share information or share resources or referrals among your community partners? And possibly how do you sort of get a consent that to be able to try to create a flow, some kind of referral process, if you will. Is that what you're asking about?
That was spot on. Thank you very much.
Okay, so is there anyone on the phone that may have some experience with sort of using a developmental screening process, a community-wide one, and then maybe how sort of you've had to kind of get that approval from, from maybe program administrators to be able to do some kind of a shared intake or shared consent? Is there anyone on the phone that has an experience or knows of a friend that may have started to go down this way that could share? I'm just trying to kind of go back into my memories of working with some of the innovation zones. And one of the ones that come to my mind is Janice over in the Greater East St. Louis community. I know that a lot of their efforts during this pilot was really centered on sort of that developmental screening process and how they've used the community to sort of do that outreach and making sure that the children were getting screened, but then really trying to figure out how they kind of partnered up with school districts so there wasn't multiple screenings done, and so that folks were able to kind of share information or get consent to be able to share family's name or anything else so that the child could receive additional supports. So I know maybe I can definitely send you contact information to Janet. I know also the folks in Oak Park, they've also been doing this for a number of years, really doing community-wide screening. And then again, with the school districts, with their child care centers, and thinking about how, you know, they're being able to share that information again to be able to refer them to additional services. And I think another community that I recently heard about was the Wheaton-Warrenville. They, through the ABLE pilot, really focused on sort of identifying where sort of that point of contact would be within the community. And so I think they've joined efforts with the school district to actually partner up with doing the screenings and then sort of getting the results and then identifying what those next steps might be. So if you don't mind, I mean, I could definitely put you in contact with a couple of those and then possibly you'd be able to talk to them offline to kind of figure out how they got around, you know, kind of the legality of it. Both, I think, maybe from the family part of it, but also from sort of the programmatic side of it. Is that okay, Jackie?
Oh, I would love that. Thank you, Edna.
Okay, great. Greater East, now let me remember who I mentioned. Greater East St. Louis, Oak Park, and Wheaton-Warrenville. And actually, if you have a chance, Oak Park recently did sort of a guest blog for us on the developmental screening process. And so if you look on our website, on the Partner Plan Act website, you might be able to just briefly read the blog, which talks about kind of, you know, what they did, why they did it, and kind of how they did it. And I know that coordinator was also happy to share sort of their insights and maybe how they got around things too. So I invite you to, for anybody really on the phone, to look at that blog if you're interested in doing something like that, and then we can definitely put you in contact with others who've kind of overcome that.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Are there any other questions? And if you think of something as, you know, as your day continues on, feel free to send us an email and we'll be happy to set up a call and talk to you or exchange emails and see if there's ways that we can connect you to other folks who might be experiencing some of the same issues that you are. Okay, so again, moving towards the closing of our webinar, I'd just like to share some additional resources with you. Again, if you would like to visit our Partner Plan Act website, under the Act section of the website, it talks about sort of the measurable outcomes and logic models and has some additional resources there to, you know, that you could check out. Another resource that folks have referred to is the Community Toolbox, which is housed on, I believe, the University of Kansas or Kentucky. I know there's two different states, but I can't think of it right now. I think it's Kentucky. But the website is there, and really it does help. It does list a number of toolkits there that help you sort of move along the process of this community systems work. And lastly, again, I know communities have, some communities have engaged in the training of the Able Change framework, but please know that anyone can really sign up to check out the framework tools, and you can do so through this website. And again, you know, it's sort of not meant to kind of go on your own for that. If you would like to possibly find somebody that would be able to help you address some of the processes or some barriers that might come up with that process, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to connect you with somebody who's been sort of moving along that process as well. And lastly, we'd like to, sorry, not lastly, but almost last, we'd like to share a couple upcoming events. Next week, if you have not signed up yet, we are still accepting registrations on the day of to attend our annual Spring into Action conference in Springfield. Also, make sure that you have May 9th on your calendar. We are partnering up with one of our other early childhood partners, advocacy partners, and going down together to Springfield on May 9th to advocate with our legislators. Another date to please save is the upcoming Partner Plan Act Conference in Bloomington on Tuesday, June 13th. That is a great place to come together with other collaboration leaders, other systems leaders, to do some peer-to-peer networking, to learn about some best practices, and really to just take a day out to really think about the important work that all the communities are doing. And lastly, we invite you to also save the date for June 22nd. We'll be down in Normal and having a statewide policy caucus. And so if I can invite you to just do one more activity for me, I'd really like it if you could please, on a scale of 1 to 5, just share how valuable your participation was on today's webinar. And if you can give me a moment, I've got to launch it. Still learning how to do this. Okay. So if you can just take a look at the different options and let us know if it's valuable, if it was very valuable, if it was moderately, slightly, or not valuable at all. I do not take any offense at all, so please be very honest and share your opinion. Let's see, just waiting to make sure everybody's voted. Okay. Everyone has voted, and I'm trying to see if we can share. Oh, yep, share it. Great. Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to be transparent and share what other peers thought about this webinar. So again, at this time, on behalf of Illinois Action for Children and the Community Consortium for Community Systems Development, I'd like to thank you for your participation and your time today. And if you have additional questions or want to connect with other folks, please feel free to email me if you have my email address, or feel free to email us at partnerplanact at actforchildren.org. And this concludes our webinar. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.